Hello and welcome to Praying on Purpose. This morning, I want to begin to talk about that which is undoubtedly the most important word that we will ever say in davening, the most important word in brachos, and I think we would all agree the most important word in Lashon HaKodesh in Hebrew and perhaps any language, and that is the name of God. We know that in the Hebrew language we have numerous names. Most of them are what Chazal call kinuyim, which are more like nicknames or descriptions that we use to describe different aspects of how we relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, for example, the name Elokim, the name Kel, Shakai, these are all names that are used to describe HaKadosh Baruch Hu without using his real name. But the name that we call the Shem Havaya, the Shem HaMafurash, which is written Yud-Kei Vav-Kei and pronounced Adonai, that is the word that we find primarily used in the Torah, describing God. That is the word that we use in the beginning of every bracha. And it is a word which is found repeatedly throughout davening, again and again and again. I am not going to go through the count. I'm not even going to try to estimate. But we say the name of Hashem hundreds of times throughout the day. And that puts a tremendous responsibility on each and every one of us to at least try to understand what it is that we are saying, or perhaps more importantly, what should our kavanah be when we are saying that name. So there is actually a specific halach in Shulchan Aruch about this very question. Generally, you will not find that the Mechaber in Shulchan Aruch is going to tell us what kavanah we should have for every word in davening. That is very much not the case. But over here, there is an entire siman. It's a short siman, but there's a siman in Shulchan Aruch, siman Hey, in the very beginning of Shulchan Aruch, which is titled Kavanah Sabrachos, the kavanah that a person should have when reciting brachos. And the Mechaber begins by telling us, Yichavim ba'brachos perish hamilos. First and foremost, when a person is reciting the brachos, it's appropriate to know what you're saying, because that's why we're having this conversation, especially on Thursdays when we talk about what it is that we are saying. Last couple weeks ago, we talked about Baruch. We spent a week or two on Atah, and now we are up to the Shem Hashem. And says the Mechaber, Kishiyazkir Hashem, when a person says the Shem Hashem, Yichavim perush kri'aso, he should have kavanah to in the interpretation of the way that he is reading the word, meaning ba'adnus. When the person says Adonai, which literally means my master, Shuhu Adon Hakol. A person, when saying that word, should say that God is Adon Hakol, the master of all. It's going to take more time, and I'm not even sure that we're going to do this right now, to really talk about what that means. To think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu as being Adon, which means that I am his Eved. But the first point, says Mechaber, is that one should have kavanah ba'adnus Shuhu Adon Hakol. And then he says, V'chavim b'ksivaso, a person should also have kavanah to try to tap into a little bit about the meaning of the word, the way it is written. B'yud hey, meaning the word that we see in front of us. Generally, I mean, there are exceptions, but generally it is not aleph, daled, nun, yud. We see the yud, the hey, and then the vav and the hey. That is shahaya v'hova v'yiyeh. The kind of concept that HaKadosh Baruch Hu transcends time, was, is, and always will be, which means a lot more than just HaKadosh Baruch Hu transcends time. That's a completely different meaning. In other words, what the Mechaber is teaching, this is pretty much word for word straight out of the Torah, is that the Shem Hashem is very interesting, because generally speaking, we read exactly what we see in front of us. If there's a word that is written a certain way, that's how we read it. We can, sometimes if we're coming across a word that we had never seen before, we'll just try to, use our understanding of Hebrew language and just follow whatever phonetic form there is in order to construct the word the way it's written. But we don't do that with the Shem Hashem. We look at what it says, the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey, but that's not what we read. We say the word Adonai. And the Mechaber says that we should try to have kavanah for both of these. Now, this could be a little overwhelming. It's difficult enough, as we know, to concentrate at all on davening what I'm saying. Over here, I have to hold two things in my head at the same time. What exactly does that mean? So the Mishnah Berurah over here quotes from the Vilna Gaon, who says, "Me'ikar adin, it is not necessary. It's not necessary for a person to really have kavanah ela perish kiriyaso." Generally speaking, he says we go after the way you read a word, not what is written in front of you. So the Vilna Gaon seems to be saying that if you have kavanah when you say the Shem Hashem for the Shem Adnus, that Hashem is Adon, I call the master of all, that's okay. He said, Levad b'Kriya Shema. When it comes to Kriya Shema, when saying Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, so over there it is important that a person takes a little more time with the Shem Hashem and try to incorporate both of these ideas in his mind at the same time. But still, the Mechaber, the Gra is not disagreeing with the Mechaber that there is a value, there is something important over here about trying to sort of incorporate these two meanings in our head at the same time. Now, what's going on over here? This is clearly an unusual type of situation. There is a classic situation, which is rare, but we have it, the concept of a kriyu ksiv. There are times where there's a word that's written a certain way in the Torah, and it's pronounced differently. But there, and this is what the Vilna Gaon seems to be saying, what we're most interested in is the kriya, the way it is read, not the way it appears in front of us. But over here, we're trying to incorporate both of these meanings in our mind at the same time. We're trying to sort of bring both of these concepts into our prayers. And why is that? Why should what is the basis behind that? So this seems to be based on a Gemara in Maseches Pesachim. The Gemara in Daf Nun Maseches Pesachim tells us, based on a pasuk that we all know, Bayomahu, on that day, Yeh Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad. On that day, God will be one, and His name will be one. And the Gemara asks an obvious question: what, today God is not one? Today His name is not one. What does that mean? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is perfect today. What does it mean on that day? Someday in the future, B'Mosa Mashiach, God will be one. What does that mean? So the Gemara says, there's a difference between where we are now and where we will be as Hashem in the future. Maybe this is referring to Olam Haba, not just B'Mosa Mashiach, but literally Olam Haba in a more transcendent world. Regardless, Rav Nachman Yitzchak says that the difference between here and there, now and then. Olam Hazeh, says the Gemara, this world, nichtav b'yud hey v'nikra ba'alav daled. Says the Gemara, in this world, we write the Shem Hashem with the yud hey and then the vav hey, but that's not how we pronounce it. We pronounce it aleph daled, meaning Adonai. Avalo olam haba, but in the world to come, kulo echad, it will be one name, nikra b'yud hey v'nichtav b'yud hey. We will write it one way and we will pronounce it the same way. So says the Gemara. So this is a fascinating idea, one that really should spark a tremendous amount of curiosity. Clearly, the Gemara is trying to convey a message which is much deeper than that which appears on the surface. But we seem to have discovered the point in which this tension, this special direction that Chazal are teaching us, that we have to try to have two kavanas in our head at the same time. This is not a regular word. This is not a regular calling of the Shem Hashem. This is a name that has embedded within it two different types of ideas. And there's this tension between Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. Right now, we're limited. In the future, we'll have less limitation. And we're trying to sort of incorporate these two ideas together. What does this mean? So another clue, perhaps, is the Gemara goes on to say, Lo Olam Hazeh, Olam Haba. There's another difference between this world and the next world. Olam Hazeh, Basuras Tovos. In this world, on good news, we say Baruch HaTov HaMeitiv. When a person encounters whatever, there's a wonderful event in one's life, person is zocha to have to purchase, let's say, a new car, a new home, and especially if that is going to be used for mitzvos and it's going to facilitate chesed that's done for others. So a person recites the bracha of Hatov HaMeitiv. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is wonderful, so good to me. And what about Basuros Ra'os? Bad news, unfortunately, when one hears about the death of another person, the bracha is Baruch Dayan Emes. Says the Gemara, Lo Olam Haba, Kulo Atov HaMeitiv. In Olam Haba, everything that happens, no matter what sort of experiences one has, no matter what sort of tidings one hears, it'll always be Atov HaMeitiv. Now, what does that mean? Why would anybody ever recite the words Hatov HaMeitiv on what we would call bad news? So I see that we're almost at the end of our time, because I try to keep within a certain time limit over here, but I'm spending time on this to really sort of develop the question. And I'm going to begin. I'm just going to begin to answer this right now. We're going to need to take a little more time with this. So unlike most of our messages until now, we're going to sort of break this conversation into at least two parts. But again, the halacha is that when we say the Shem Hashem, we're supposed to have two kavanos in mind, ideally, says the Mechaber. Adon HaKol, which is the way we pronounce the word, and Hoya Hove Vigia, the way we see the word in front of us. And we bring both of these kavanos in our mind at the same time. The Vilna Gaon says we don't have to make ourselves crazy. Mikra Adin, if we have in mind Adon HaKol, that is sufficient. But when we're saying Kriya Shema, we should try to have both ideas in our mind. But what's going on over here? Why can't we just say what we mean or mean what we say? What's going on? And we're suggesting that perhaps this is based on a Gemara in Maseches Pesachim, where the Gemara tells us that in this world our perspective is limited. Our perspective prevents us, our limitations prevent us from being able to look at the Shem Hashem and pronounce what we see. It seems almost as if what Chazal are telling us is that in this world, there's only so much that we can understand. There's only so much that is revealed, and the rest is hidden. And so, therefore, we don't want to completely sort of give up on the dream of being able to realize, to understand, to appreciate, to connect to something which is very transcendent. But at the same time, we have to understand that in this world, we are limited. So I'm going to leave it at that. There is more to say. For those of you who are wondering, wait a second, I don't understand the answer. It's because I haven't really given it yet. What I have is I've provided you with the source, the Gemara in Pesachim, which is going to help us understand this a little better. Maybe, honestly, having a week to just sort of allow this to digest this idea a little bit, to think about it a little bit, will be good for each and every one of us. And B'ezras Hashem, when we pick up this conversation next week, we'll be able to understand with a little more clarity what exactly this means, that in this world we say the Shem Hashem differently than we read it. Until then, we should certainly try, as the Mechaber teaches in Siman Hey and Shulchan Aruch, to be mechavein, to try to have proper kavana every time we say the Shem Hashem, at the very least, that Hashem is Adon HaKol. And if we slow down a little bit and look at the name in front of us, and we see the Yud Hey Vav Hey, it can also and should remind us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is truly transcendent, tapping in once again to a completely different idea in our connection with the Shem Hashem. To be continued. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.